All right. This ties in pretty nice with Stephen Gregg's presentation regarding Down to Earth and Larry Bartosek's Descending the Space Elevator. A little background, I got an interest into tethered satellites in my freshman year in college, where we had a study to determine what the profile was for a steel cable to do a tethered satellite. And our conclusion was there's not enough iron in Earth to do the tether. But then in 2003, I read an article by Dr. Edwards on the space elevator. He had that in the magazines and so forth. I saw that on a flight back from LA. And I began thinking at that time, now space elevators are a real thing, or can be a real thing. So I started developing a simulator in 2003. But when I met Dr. David Lang in 2005 at one of the ISDC conferences, I talked him into giving me a copy of GTOS at that time. And since 2005, for the last 20 years, I've been improving or adding features to the simulator. And that's what I've been using for these simulations and for the simulations between 2005 and now. What's the motivation to build? Deimos is a tidally locked moon. Similar to our moon. Orbital altitude is 23,500 kilometers, more or less, which is significantly smaller than the 100,000 kilometer tether for Earth. So it'd be a good test bed for constructing an elevator and so forth. The orbital period of Deimos is approximately the rotational period of Mars, so it's in near geosynchronous orbit. Surface velocity difference is about 150, 160 kilometers per hour. So, there wouldn't be much effort to synchronize the, at the final descent phase, synchronize the speeds, to match. And another motivation, it increases the payload capacity of Starship. And I would think it's statistically safer to land the craft than to do the suicide plunge or whatever the name they put on the final plunge through the atmosphere of Mars. The method of operation would be you rendezvous the spaceship or Starship near the climber or near Deimos. You descend, you attach the climber and descend down towards Mars. And then when you're reasonably close to Mars, you'd release, say, at 1 kilometer altitude, which is about the altitude that they project to do the final maneuver to land the Starship. And the Starship would perform the touchdown as it would if it came burning through the atmosphere. The delivery schedule at same site, it would take, well, the 93 hours and 40 minutes for a one-way climber included a 24-hour attenuation phase after a prior delivery. So I'm assuming on the order of a 93 or 100 hours for a one-way climber or for multiple climbers on the tether. For the climber to come back, of course, you'd have to double that time. You could increase the delivery rate by having multiple Starships, with a heavier gauge tether, or or you could have the Starship deliver a climber with every delivery, and you dispense the climber at the bottom of the tether at each transit, and you'd reuse the motors and wheels and everything else for your infrastructure that you build up on Mars. The impact on the Starship was you'd remove the heat tiles, the LOX header tank, the methylene, the methanol tank, header tank, the fore and aft actuator fins, and you'd maybe replace the the Earth atmospheric engines with Mars-based atmospheric engines, which may actually be suitable to use the vacuum engines on Mars with this minor degradation in efficiency in that. The climber would resemble a repeller, and it would be like a gantry crane. Once you're in the gravitational well, of course, the Starship would hang suspended from the gantry crane. Of course, going down, you'd use either solar or initially you need some power to migrate away from Deimos. So you'd need a power to pay out or down the towards Mars. But once you get significantly into the gravitational well, that should have sufficient energy to continue either your acceleration or maintain your travel rate. And my simulations are using approximately 100 meters per second or 360 kilometers per hour. Release point, again, about 1 kilometer above Mars, and so forth. Deimos infrastructure. I keep saying Deimos because I've had that in my mind, but it's more like a German spelling. Deimos infrastructure. You need a base station anchored sufficiently on the surface. It may require pilings or some other means to attach to it. The base station, of course, would be solar powered. Its use would be to deploy the initial tether, which would be substantially easier than deploying the tether on Earth, since the GEO position is actually inside the radius of Deimos. And then afterwards, and when you're in service or operation, you'd need to adjust the length of the tether dependent upon the payload, the mass of the Starship with payload, to balance what your intended mass budget was. And for avoiding phobos or any other collision possibilities, maybe a satellite that's orbiting Mars, you'd have a rail system that the base station is, or at least the tether reel is based on, and it would be in a north-south position on the on Deimos, where you can give insert a wave, a transitional wave into the tether, similar to the base motion studies they did with the Earth-based one on the floating platform. Mars infrastructure, you'd need to have well, let me first describe the tether. The tether, you intend to descend to within maybe 250 kilometers or less, 100 to 250 kilometers from the end of the tether. And that end will penetrate the atmosphere and be caught by a mobile loose end tether capture vehicle. And that capture vehicle will deploy that loose end while reeling in the slack of the tether into a high mass, possibly 2x the Starship and with payload mass, and winch vehicle that would reel in the remainder of the tether. And then the infrastructure required to do some site prep, like move boulders out of the way and so forth. Nothing major. The capture vehicle, I mean, I've just picked some JPEGs off the internet. Would be highly maneuverable, possibly four-wheel steering, because it's got to maneuver underneath the descending end of the cable tether and then wind it in. This section of the tether could be round as opposed to being a flat ribbon tether. And it'll reel in and transport the reel mechanism to the large mass winch vehicle. That vehicle would resemble the crawler for, this is the crawler for the Saturn V. So it resembled that, and it'd have to have sufficient mass to facilitate the reel in and positioning of the descent starship. As the prior to reaching the 1,000 kilometer release point, the base the winch vehicle can do some minor adjustments in the position of the starship, to facilitate it hitting the right target on the landing ascent. But the major purpose of the mass is to compensate for the tension release that occurs when the starship lets go of the transport climber, and then so it's got to stop the recoil from snapping that end up, a few, several hundred, several thousand kilometers and so forth. Because if that recoil isn't attenuated, then your next launch may have to be delayed considerably while you wait for the, tether to quiesce in that. For non-equatorial landings, you might consider adding two additional but low capacity Mentalox engines that would be in the base skirt of the starship. And you may also need a rigid coupling between the starship and the gantry, such that it can apply torque to orient the two thrusters so that it bypasses the tether, so the exhaust doesn't hit the tether. So now you can then use the differentially use the thrust to reorient the spaceship north or south of the tether for migrating the base end of the tether away from the equatorial position. Starship extraction could be possible if you attach to the gantry after the prior delivery was dispatched, and then the tractor, the winch system would pay out the loose end until it came to the end of the loose end, it'd release that, and then the starship would, or the climber would pull the starship up to an optimal altitude for release, and you fire your engines and release from the tether. The tether material, I'm looking at the polycrystalline graphene as presented earlier, and in the range of, I'm using 90, I think 91 gigapascals in my simulation. The design of the tether is for a homogeneous or uniform strain of 4% when the starship is at the Mars position. And I'm assuming a safe strain level, a maximum strain level of 6%. And 250 ton gross ton with the vehicle and the starship and that delivery. The mass of the tether is on the order of 670 metric tons for this size of tether.
1 minute to go.
Okay, this is a picture of the simulator either running or in post-analysis. It uses a script thing. This is part of the script. I have to add the Mars atmospheric module. That's what I was talking with Blaze before. And here's the Mars end during contact. The crosshairs are the position of the tail end, the ground end anchor, and then the apex anchor, and you'll see the climber coming in on the right side of the screen as it gets closer. Now the radius of here's the climber of the Mars is not quite the actual, the junction of where the attach point is, and this is a crash that's going to occur pretty soon. Okay, you'll see the ground anchor hit, and and the rotation of Mars is going to pull it away. There it goes. Crash. Okay. And here's a picture of Phobos coming into the tether. And in this particular pass, it comes about 180 kilometers or so from the tether. Okay. And this is using the frame of references from Deimos, and this is the travel passes of Deimos and the climber and so forth. Okay, questions?
Cool. Well, I guess if I'd been reading my ISEC newsletters better, I would have already seen this in one of them. I'm curious for the north-south capability. You talked about using thrusters. I'm curious if you've considered having a wing at the bottom of the tether and using that to force yourself north or south.
You could, but I think that would give you only marginal distance north and south. Although it's something I certainly can do in the simulation once I get the atmospheric model in there, because the wing, remember, you're coming down at 360 kilometers per hour. You're not, the bottom end isn't going to be in the atmosphere that long, 10, 20 minutes or something like that, where it's in dense enough atmosphere. So I don't think you would affect that much motion on the Starship as it's coming down. I think it'd be better to have a few thrusters to push it. Now the pendulum nature of the system would mean that you don't need that large of thrust capacity, I believe, on the Starship, and it certainly will have residual methane in its main tanks to supply the additional 2 thrusters that you put on the skirt.
I was thinking the wing might be a permanent fixture of the tether, like kind of a
right,
counterweight.
There is a counterweight on the bottom. There's a spool, either a spool or the loose end of the tether, but the counterweight certainly could have wings on it, and because you've got that 160 kilometer per hour difference in the rotational rates at the surface, that might be sufficient velocity to give you a good lift, either in the north or south direction to pull on the tether. So those certainly are things that can be done in simulation once I get the Mars simulator running, or atmospheric model installed.
How large of a steering module are you talking about? Because really the Martian atmosphere is so thin. There's a reason certain things are not done aerodynamically. So
but you could put something like a reasonably sized sailplane or glider on the on the tail end there. And
what's reasonably sized, and what weight are you talking about then?
Maybe it's 10 tons or something like that.
Yeah, you know the parachutes, even for the 1-ton landers, are like 30 meters diameter, so it's huge stuff.
Yeah, so that's why I was recommending doing the rocket motors on the Starship, but Glaze would like to explore the possibility of using aero control. And those certainly are studies that can be done using the simulator once I get it up to snuff for doing this type of
moving mass upward and down is not helping. And the other thing is the propellant use for the Starship to land somewhere is usually underestimated. So we really need to look at hard numbers before
Right.
we do the call.
Now,
Wow.
there is a separate simulation model that I have where the winching system brings it down to the winch vehicle. So there is no thrust on it. And that helps in that you don't have an instantaneous release of tension on the tether, because you can gradually pay the truss climber out above the tether, to release it gradually. And so there may be a benefit in doing that. I just chose that because of a quirk in running the simulation with very short tethers. You'd have a tether on the order of the height of the Starship, and that produces very small integration step sizes, and so it was a trade-off in me getting some data ready for this presentation versus doing an in-depth study in that. So it certainly can be done, to study both ways, whether you release for a fired take landing, or whether you pull it down to the winch vehicle.
Hey, Jim,
Okay, we've got time for one more question.
Jim, I was wondering what the inclination of Deimos is. Isn't it somewhat equatorial, or is it?
No, it's got a few degrees. I don't.
Well,
you can get on some sites and look at it. Deimos and
0.93.
Pardon?
0.93.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
not much.
The real kicker is most of the planning is going to the water bases, which are mid-latitude in my book. Now, Bruce, you could improve my knowledge here. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. There you go.
Both Phobos and Deimos are very close to the equator. I know we only wanted one more question, but I have several serious comments. I think you can get rid of the winch vehicle and just, have the Starship land on legs and rockets just for the last, 100 kilometers or so.
right. The problem I have with the winch vehicle is that if you release from the tether, the recoil of the tether is so severe that it's unusable for a long time afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just say this real quick, and then let's take it offline. If you want to steer north and south, like with a kite, you could have the Starship on its side and at an angle, and you get a little bit of a kite effect, pulling sideways. You might consider just sending the payload down and leave the Starship up near Deimos. And I'd love to talk with you more. I've thought a lot about a space elevator from Phobos, not from Deimos. Over.
Bruce, are you aware that we're actually starting a Mars study at ISEC, and you would be most welcome to join there?